We'll go ahead and get started. I just wanted to say good morning to everyone. I'm Julie Marie Vanderberg. I'm the Chief Programs and Products Officer here at PQMD. On behalf of our entire team, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's Pillar Talk entitled Evolving Together, the Changing Center of Gravity in Global Health. So I'm really excited to be here today and for PQMD to host this event. Global health is experiencing such deep and ongoing shifts right now. And part of that is navigating how to set priorities at a national level and shape strategies to lead with clarity and conviction, all at a time when roles are changing. So today's event is going to be part of our ongoing Pillar Talk series. We create events that focus on interesting and timely topics that are of importance to our PQMD network. When we can bring leaders from NGOs, companies, academia, institutions, agencies, and organizations together to bring these emerging issues to life on the PQMD stage. And it's always grounded in our 6 pillars. We focus on humanitarian assistance, health system strengthening, disaster response and preparedness, guidelines for product donations, knowledge and innovation, and climate and health. If you're new to PQMD, a special welcome to you here today. It's really great to see all of the familiar faces. We are an alliance that joins together the NGO and corporate sectors. We're passionate about strengthening access to quality medicines, medical devices, and health services across the globe. Just before we begin, really quick housekeeping. If you don't mind, please introduce yourself with your name and your organization into the chat. We'd love to see who's in the room. And we would love to save some time for Q&A at the end of the session. So please put your questions in the chat and we can call on you, or you can raise your hand at the end of the session. And otherwise, we'd ask you to please stay on mute, and unless it's at the Q&A when we'd ask you to come off mute to talk. Today's session is being recorded so that it'll be available for you later this week on the PQMD's community of practice. Also, throughout the event, we'll put in some information into the chat about our organization and our resources. So now we get to transition to our wonderful panel. We're very lucky to have a panel of people who show up every day and can highlight the importance of this conversation, what it means for our organizations, from a community level to national systems change. And we're equally as fortunate to have Julie Jensen with us today. She is the Director of Product Donations at Pfizer and a member of Pfizer's Global Health Investment Team. She is also a past board chair here at PQMD. She's really worked at the intersection of corporate responsibility, country leadership, and health system strengthening across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. I've always known Julie to be very grounded and practical in her perspective. And she has a very strong commitment to driving practical change. We're very lucky to have her here with us today. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie Marie. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion today on the changing center of gravity in global health. Thank you so much, Julie Marie, for you and the team for organizing it. I think we've all seen in recent weeks, there have been a lot of webinars on similar topics, but what we hope to do today is just really bring this discussion back to the PQMD community so that we can better navigate this changing ecosystem and what it means to our organizations. This community is international NGOs and the corporate sector. So hopefully the conversation really pulls out those perspectives and experiences. As our introduction read, for years we've been talking about the term local leadership, but we're finally here. We're in this new era of opportunity, one where countries are charting their own course in healthcare and the entire ecosystem is being reimagined. So during the call today, we hope to touch on some of the questions like, what will be the roles of international organizations going forward? How can we best collaborate? And especially, how do we all fit in within and reinforce national health systems? And as you mentioned, we have an incredible panel and here today to share their current thinking and practical real-world examples. We've gathered Dixon Chibanda, Wandason Asefa, and Mary Beth Powers. And we've all read your impressive bios, but I would love if each of you can do a quick introduction and help frame our conversation by sharing what the term locally led means to you in your day-to-day work. So not just as a slogan, but how do you make decisions, set priorities, and deliver healthcare in your work? So I think we'll start with you, Dixon.
You. Thank you very much for having me. For me, local leadership, just really based on my experience doing the work that I do, is really about proximal leadership, which is anchored in indigenous knowledge and wisdom and ways of navigating, the well-being space. As a psychiatrist, that's something that I focus on. Yeah.
Thank you. Wanderson?
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Wenderson Asafa. I'm Director for Global Health Programs Development with Project Hope. Project Hope works on global health programs both on the development and emergency and humanitarian setting. Locally led means for us, Project Hope is putting local partners the front end and center and playing a role in prioritizing development challenges problems and playing an active role in terms of designing programs, decision-making process, and accessing funds directly.
Thank you. And Mary Beth?
Hi, I'm Mary Beth Powers. I'm the CEO of Catholic Medical Mission Board. So we're a 100-plus-year-old organization that is similar to Project Hope, engaged in strengthening health systems, as well as providing resources, training, and other assets to try and help health systems more capably address the health problems that they face, that they identify. I guess for me, and being part of a Catholic organization, there's this concept in Catholic social teaching of subsidiarity, which is about bringing decision making closest to the people affected by decisions. So for me, when I think about locally led, it's how much are people on the ground involved in designing the solutions that are going to affect their lives because they're the closest to the problems.
Thank you, everyone. So excited to actually get into the details of your work. As we were doing the prep for this call, we kind of found three constructs that emerged about how global health or health programs are designed. And the first is really very much hyper-local grassroots programs that start within a community and then grow maybe to a national level and even beyond. That's kind of like the first one. But then you have almost the flip side of there are programs that are conceived at an international level that kind of make their way into a country. And this might be where a lot of our organizations fall. And now we're in this transition period of how do we make those into locally led programs. And then the third construct is, what about new programs? How are those catalyzed? Who leads? And how do we all fit into from here going forward? So I'd like to start actually with you, Dixon, because your work began at a community level. Friendship Bench has now scaled nationally in Zimbabwe and beyond. But can you talk a little bit about your program and what you learned about starting in the community, but then maintaining those elements as you got bigger and you scaled nationally?
Great. So I guess I think to start off, I'd just like to emphasize that when I started Friendship Bench, I had 14 grandmothers, and today we have over 4,000 grandmothers. And some of the key lessons during my journey with Friendship Bench as the founder is it's important to start small. You don't always need money. And you need to lean into the local wisdom, knowledge, and language. And you need to also leverage the, indigenous frameworks of well-being, such as Ubuntu, which is, an African concept, which really is about me being here because we are all together. So I think what has really made Friendship Bench sustainable over the years is that, anchoring and grounding in the indigenous knowledge. But when you do that, naturally, you need to also generate evidence to show that that actually works. because you're not only dealing with the local community, you also have an international community. So again, at Friendship Bench, I've always emphasized, publication of the evidence in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And to date, we have over 150 peer-reviewed scientific journal publications about the Friendship Bench and the effectiveness of using grandmothers to address the care gap for mental, neurological, and substance use disorders in Zimbabwe and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to kind of understand then, how did you bring that to the national policymakers? And how did that help shape policy and national leadership?
So as part of the research, we deliberately integrated Friendship Bench in the government's priority public health programs, such as HIV, maternal and child health. And so by doing that and generating evidence, which is published in international peer-reviewed journals, the government then sees, the usefulness of Friendship Bench in alleviating not only mental health challenges, but for instance, when you integrate Friendship Bench in the HIV care program in Zimbabwe, it improves HIV outcomes, something that policymakers within the health department are really interested in. And likewise, in the maternal and child health space, you see an improvement of outcomes of both mother and infant. And so some of these sort of low-hanging fruits, which already exist, are kind of key in terms of us selling Friendship Bench. So we really integrated in these existing programs.
Thank you. And we'll get back, I'm sure, to how you've then gone beyond Zimbabwe. So I'd like to turn to Wandason. We're going to talk a little bit about now how INGOs evolve. So now programs are more shaped and delivered to partners closest to the system. So Project Hope has made strategic decisions to shift more responsibility to local partners and move away from being an implementing organization to more of a technical support role. How did you determine where and when to adjust your involvement? And what organizational mindset changes did you need to do this to enable local partners to step up to leadership while you continue to provide guidance?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. This shift didn't happen overnight for us at Project Hope. It has been a deliberate and strategic journey over years of working differently with different local actors and local systems and structures, including host country governments. I kind of just want to put this into three pathways. The first kind of strategy and pathway that we've been implementing for years was like identifying local partners and taking them as a sub-partner, while Project Hope as ING was playing a prime implementing role, and building their capacity over time and making them ready to be prime recipients of major programs and major funding from major donors. I can give like a specific example for that. We've started in 2017 a community HIV/AIDS care and treatment project in Ethiopia, where we've identified 14 local implementing partners as a partner. And that was a USAID PEPFAR funded program, now managed under State Department with a new change. And we initially were playing a really prominent role in terms of directly implementing the program and building the capacity and strengthening capacity of those local actors. That includes funding management, setting technical directions, ensuring compliance, and things like that. But through strategic and collaborative engagement with the donor and the local partners, we worked with those partners to transition them into a prime readiness status. And fortunately, 5 of those 14 local implementing partners were qualified and become eligible to receive funding directly as a prime implementers. Now they're currently implementing quite large and complex HIV/AIDS care treatment and prevention programs as a prime implementers. And now our role has shifted into providing technical assistance, quality assurance, and continuing the capacity strengthening effort that we've started. So major role and responsibility, including funding, is going directly to the local partners. The second pathway that we're using is trying to establish local and regional affiliates. We've done that in Southern Africa, in Namibia. Now we have African Public Health Network, APH chain, which is
Mhm.
a Namibia-based entity, currently implementing major programs, over $100 million now, in multiple countries, Malawi and Namibia, as a primary recipient of Department of State the grant. And Project Top continue to play a very limited and targeted technical assistance role.
That's great. I actually wanted to build on that with Mary Beth because I think CMMB has undergone similar transitions where you've shifted, to national government institutes or created affiliates within countries that now operate fully independently. So, can you talk a little bit about transitioning those organizations and then kind of the complications that you faced and how you've overcome that?
Sure. So, in fact, it's interesting our own history because compared to maybe some other nonprofit organizations, we've only had country level programs for like the last 20 years. So, the first 80 years of CMMB's history, we were investing in local institutions and supporting local mission hospitals, local programs, et cetera. But with the advent of the HIV situation in Africa, we got invited in by bishops' councils and others to kind of help support the development of programs on the ground. And that's when we actually built country offices. So you're right, two of those country offices have now become local entities. There's a formal way that you go through that in terms of registration, government kinds of registration, creation of local governance, et cetera. And when I came into CMMB 5 years ago, that was sort of where the process was beginning. We were starting to build out local governance. Both Kenya and Zambia have very qualified boards who have been through board retreat training, et cetera, that they selected themselves as appropriate for their context and their culture. So it's really been an effort for us to kind of, I think, like Wandason was saying, like what's that support role as you're trying to step back and allow for local leadership and instead respond to requests for technical assistance as opposed to suggesting what kind of technical assistance people might need as they work on governance, because that is something that is very locally led. And also some of the regulations for local NGOs, of course, are determined by national governments. So we've been working on that. I just learned this new phrase, which is about moving at the speed of trust, which I just love because I think for international NGOs who are looking at this localization journey, which in and of itself is a ridiculous term, but it's sort of the term that became adopted by the US government with some of their partners. The idea of sort of how do we walk alongside them or accompany them on a journey, but in that whole way, you're trying to build trust. So that's trust between our board and the local institutions and their boards. It's also trust between their programmatic leaders and the folks who had previously provided technical assistance and advice to these programs. So those are some of the things that we've been working on to try and kind of embed trust in local leadership, but also be at the ready on the other side of the phone if we're trying to work through things together. And some of those things also are things as effective as sort of like having one finance system, like purchasing that so that everyone can have real-time data and use the same kind of data systems, et cetera. So there's still some things in the CMMB family that we've provided as tools to these evolving institutions.
Yeah, no, I think those are incredible examples. And I kind of want to stay on this construct for a minute because I know we have a lot of INGOs on the line who are navigating similar challenges. And we're getting a few questions that I'd like to send maybe to both of you. Maybe Wandason, you can start. What criteria do you use to assess the readiness, or what indicators show that these local institutions and NGOs were ready to transition to, I guess, more implementer roles in these projects?
Yeah, it's a good question. We kind of like have organizational capacity assessment tool. We call it OCAD, largely adopted from previously USAID's local capacity building domains, local organization capacity building domains. it has different subdomains, but largely it kind of like covers three major domains. First one being assessing their organizational or institutional governance structure and system. Um, and the second one is really focused on their technical readiness or technical capability. And the third one is focused on their capacity in terms of like ensuring program monitoring and evaluation over time. So under those major three categories, the first one focusing on the operational capability, which is finance, HR, and operation capability of the organizations being assessed. And on the second domain, their ability to design and implement their own program technically. One of the last part is mainly the program quality assurance and monitoring. So we use that kind of structured tool. It has subdomains and indicators in it. So we progressively assess that, and then after multiple assessments and ongoing capacity strengthening and support, then those organizations, when they reach to some sort of maturity or a graduation status, then that's the time where we start like considering or proposing them to assume a much more prominent role to lead a program pretty much independently as a prime.
Great. And Mary Beth, maybe if you had anything to add, and you can take the second one about how do you ensure accountability and results with your local affiliates? Yeah.
Yeah, just on the accountability and results, I think we are letting them determine what their own measures of success are. So I look in and actually meet with the country leadership, so the local CEOs more as peers, and sort of talk about how we measure our team success, just to let them set those accountability measures themselves. But then, as Wanderson is saying, sort of like do that review, ensure that they're holding themselves accountable. It's not my job to hold them accountable now, it's really their board's job. So some of that is about the dialogue that we're having with the board about what's important for our team to achieve. It's the same kind of dialogue they should be having with their board. So some of it is just modeling what that governance structure is like for holding people accountable. I guess, one thing I have to say is like, as we talk about center of gravity in this conversation, like one huge center of gravity is always who's setting the M&E indicators. And for many years and for many programs that we've been engaged in, and I'm sure my partners as well, like those were externally set. So how comfortable are any of us in shifting that center of gravity about what those results are? I think it's a great question for PQMD, as you guys are, we're all wrestling with how can we talk more about the impact of PQMD and partners consistently, but still with like locally led ideas about what success means. So
Yeah. Great points. And I want to go back to Dixon for this other question again, because I do think everyone wants to know how do you convince governments to adopt certain approaches and certain programs? And you kind of answered it, but just to give you one more chance to
Sure.
stress anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, so essentially it's really all about integrating Friendship Bench or your work in existing priority areas. So in Zimbabwe, for instance, the key priority areas are HIV, maternal and child health, NCDs. And what we have done, we've run rigorous clinical trials that show that, for instance, when you integrate Friendship Bench in HIV care programs, you improve HIV outcomes. And that on its own is a big win for the government. So we've progressively really focused on, rigorous research that shows that Friendship Bench adds value to the programs that are, prioritized by the government. That's what we've done. And of course, being consistent as well with telling the Friendship Bench story and how it's changing lives, leaning into the evidence that we're generating.
Yeah, great points about the government priorities, because this kind of leads to the third, I guess the third scenario is thinking about new programs, right? Like now that we are aligning to government priorities, how are we co-creating? So I'm going to switch back to you, Mary Beth. What are some of the most promising new ideas emerging today And when you co-create, what are you doing now that's different than you would have done 5 or 10 years ago?
Maybe for us, one of the areas that we've been doing a lot of co-creation is in the space of addressing non-communicable diseases, particularly as those are, we're all looking at the same data, which is showing these are growing concerns for some of our partners in Africa. So, for example, in Kenya, getting started with the government of Kenya on how we might go about bringing care for chronic diseases closer to the community. A really important partnership effort was a landscape analysis. Some of the kind of co-creation of the research that's going to be needed to drive those programs forward is a great way to both engage with partners who own the issue, but to bring additional resources, including Kenyan researchers, onto the scene and pay for that so that we're all working with a better data set with more information to address pressing problems that the government has identified. So for us, it's really about how do we co-create, but also co-create the data that's going to help shape the program interventions going forward.
That's great. And Wanda, I wasn't going to ask you this question, but do you have any thoughts from Project Hope on the co-creation? How are you approaching that now, the new
Sure, yeah.
programs?
I was about to talk about a co-creation that we did in Ghana last year. We got a big complex integrated health partnership program in Ghana now under DOS management, Department of State. It's an integrated health program targeting relatively underserved regions in the northern part of the country and eastern part of Ghana. From the get-go, at the right up of the conceptual stage, the donor kind of like facilitated co-creation platforms, and that co-creation really continued through the entire procurement process of the project, the grant, and we continued the co-creation process even after getting the award. And that really was a very participatory process, including Ministry of Health, Ghana Health Services, and other important actors at national level, but also the target regions, regional health directorates were participating in the co-creation process. So instead of us kind of like, giving them a packaged proposal and implementation approach, the project implementation strategy was co-created and co-designed in a very participatory way, which will make implementing the program much easier. And then you can also ensure sense of ownership from the get-go when you are participating relevant stakeholders at national and sub-national level in the program design and co-creation. I just want to mention that as a very good example.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And I think I'm going to ask Dixon the same question, but I know that for really local organizations, funding and visibility is probably an additional challenge, more so than a lot of the ING. I mean, funding is a challenge, we know that. But if you're really hyper local organization, there's obviously funding and then getting that visibility. So can you speak a little bit about for innovators with strong ideas but limited resources, what practical advice do you have for them for creating new programs and getting to scale?
Yeah, so I think it's again, I can only share my experience of creating Friendship Bench. And, for the first six years of running Friendship Bench, I had no funding. It was literally run out of pocket, Like I said right at the beginning, I think it's important to start small if you don't have the funding, because as you build the evidence and as you publish, you then begin to generate funding. And so a lot of the funders out there want to see some kind of evidence to justify why they should support your work, and so that sometimes requires a bit of time to build. So I would say you need to start from where you are with what you have and build on that, over time, but emphasizing on generating evidence which is published in international peer-reviewed journals. That goes a long way. And lastly, being very consistent with how you tell your story through the journals, through the media, through the different platforms that are out there. I know that funding is very tight right now, but we also have brilliant ideas from so many innovators. My advice is start from where you are with what you have, and you often don't really need a hell of a lot of money to start. I started with just 14 grandmothers.
No, your story is such an inspiration. And I'm going to totally switch gears a little bit because we're going to bring in the corporate perspective on this. And I think, from a Pfizer perspective, we've gone through a lot of similar shifts. A few years ago, we launched what we call the Accord for a Healthier World. And this is a program where Pfizer is selling our medicines directly to governments at a not-for-profit price in low and middle income countries. It's not working through a global mechanism. It's going bilaterally direct to governments. And the whole concept there is a government can choose, to purchase any Pfizer product, but they're choosing to procure based on their own national priorities. So one government might be prioritizing oncology, but another one is prioritizing anti-infectives. And that we have the structure to be able to do that. And one of the things that we've seen is we can make our medicines accessible. They can be procured, but there's a whole ecosystem around that therapeutic area that needs to be developed, right? The regulatory systems, healthcare provider education, supply chain that might be specific to innovative medicines. And those are places where we see partnerships with NGOs and local partners coming into play. And it's a much different shift than we would have had, pre-pandemic, where we were working very much at a global level, and now we're doing bilaterals. And I would just like to think, ask you, I can start with you, Juan Woodson. How do you work with governments and ensure that we're collaborating with national leadership, but not overshadowing it, right? Like really listening to the priorities and fitting in our organizations, within that ecosystem.
Yeah, that's one practical way we can ensure that is just the government, the host country government, responsible agencies should be really, sitting in the driver's seat, and international partners' role would be like, sitting behind and providing really necessary support that they may need, instead of kind of like, really leading this kind of initiative and process as INGO. We can bring, still there is really an important role that INGOs can play. INGOs, given the nature of like, business, and also where they are like, based, and having experience in programming globally in multiple countries and regions, we can really add a value by bringing experience from other countries. But still, in terms of determining their need, priorities, it should be really host country government structures and systems making that decision. So we've built the infrastructure for local ownership alongside direct program implementation and service delivery. And that should really start from the very beginning of any program design in partnership with the government and with corporate donors. I think that's a very important thing. We can provide training, support on regulatory process, and manage like, logistics when there is really a surge need or kind of like, emergency need. But long term, I think sustainable way of like, ensuring sustainability, local ownership, host country government systems and structures and agencies should be, owning this. And partnership with some non-state actors in some countries is really important. A good example for us in Ghana, the project that I've mentioned earlier, the Integrated Health Partnership. We were intentional when we formed the consortium arrangement partnership to bring on board CHAG, the Christian Health Association of Ghana, which has more than 300 health infrastructures and health facilities in Ghana, and providing services for more than 11 million Ghanaians every year. They are our major sub-partners in our consortium. So we're quite intentional in terms of bringing on board prominent local actors that are very critical in terms of playing on supply chain and direct service delivery in countries. So those are kind of like things that are very important to ensure local ownership and sustainability.
Yeah, and on some of that, I was curious, and anyone can answer this, but what is one thing that global organizations tend to overcomplicate when either working with national governments or local partners? I'm wondering if Dixon, if you have any any thoughts, being a local partner on the other side, what are things that we overcomplicate?
I think it's being over prescriptive, and often it's very subtle, and also not taking into consideration the local knowledge, the wisdom, and the ways that have existed for centuries of running communities. I think you need to have a balance. You need to have equipoise between a sort of Western way of looking at things and a Southern way of looking at things. So that balance often is not there. It's like systems are imposed on communities, and often then you don't have ownership. Because for things to succeed, you really do need ownership. That's really what I have observed.
Mary Beth, do you have thoughts on
No,
what
I
international
mean,
organizations overcomplicate?
well, yeah, and I mean, I was just thinking about what Dixon was saying too, because one thing, even in this kind of accompaniment on this localization journey, is that a lot about governance is really written like from a very Western perspective, to Dixon's points of how we think about governance or how we think about power and those kinds of dynamics, and even what kind of a Western individualism that permeates approaches sometimes. And that's where like we have so much to learn, in fact, by listening. So being much better and much more intentional about listening is so critical. And instead of trying to import some kind of other, and that's one challenge I always have with everything. Like we also tested a tool like OCAD, and then we developed another one in collaboration with our teams on the ground to try and really think like, what is this idea of assessing organizational readiness? Whose definition of readiness? Whose definition? So those are the kinds of external things that we also often bring into it that overcomplicate some of these kind of transitional moments, I'd say.
Anderson?
Yeah, I think the key question we always try to ask here is when we are no longer here, who will do this? I think that's the key question we always ask when we're designing and kind of like defining and determining our partnership and engagement. And then we invest in making sure that who has the capacity and resources and authority to sustain it. For corporate partners facing a similar question around provider networks or regulatory engagement, it's really about co-investing in those national systems from the start, from the beginning of like engagement and partnership, ensuring that every intervention strengthens what's already there rather than creating something parallel.
Thank you. We've got a question in the chat about corruption. And I mean, I think it's open to everyone, but how does this play into your work? I'm sure it's very context and country specific, but I think maybe well, I'm going to mix this in with a question I was going to ask next, so we can kind of take both of it. But how do we avoid, and when we're creating partnerships, what does good partnership look like? And when the government really doesn't have the full resources to fully take on a program, how do you avoid kind of overstepping your role or stepping too far back? And maybe this can kind of get to that question too. Like, how do you find that balance of the support that you're providing?
Shall I go first?
Yes, anyone?
I actually would like to tackle the very first question around corruption. Friendship Bench has a presence in all the 10 provinces of Zimbabwe. Over 1 million people have utilized the program. And we also have replicated the model in a number of countries, including in the USA. In one of our most successful projects is in Washington, D.C., in Anacostia. And when it comes to corruption, what I have seen in the different projects we run across the world, when there is no real local ownership, you are then going to get corruption. When things are imposed on communities, they abuse those things. But when there's an element of owning and actually being a part of it and seeing it grow, there is less corruption. In Zimbabwe, I'll just give a quick example. We have these support groups because most people who use the Friendship Bench join a community support group. And they have community support group that do all sorts of income generating activities, from gardening, from baking, the list is endless. And what we find is that ownership makes those teams become extremely cohesive in the work that they do. And a lot of these groups have been running for more than 10 years. So I think corruption is really about ownership. When you own something and you have vested interest in it, you will want to see it thrive and grow.
Well, and back to your point about evidence and evidence that this is working and it's making an impact in people's lives and the community. Other thoughts?
I mean, I think I just kind of go back to that example of like in terms of whether the government is ready or the second part you added. I mean, I think when you're not sure who's ready, like doing as much listening on the ground, whether that's landscape review or sort of collecting information that can actually help in people's ability to make good decisions or think through what the problems are or what the assets are that we have that we can rely upon. I think that those kinds of things actually starting more with an asset-based approach maybe instead of a problem-solving approach might also be a way that kind of builds a positive perspective on, and the government feeling energized to do it. And I think one other thing I was thinking about was just not building Cadillac models. I mean, one thing I love about the work that Dixon has been doing is that it feels very simple, but like that sort of is the point. You said you were able to start this with very little capital. When there's very little money at stake, that sometimes also drives down corruption or efforts to kind of like seize some kind of authority. And I've been part of a lot of coalition building, and the coalitions often work best when there was very little money at stake, but in fact, people had a shared interest in getting something accomplished. So, I mean, that's not to discourage funders, but it's to really help us remember that the addition of cash is not always the answer, especially when you're trying to get to a thoughtful, collaborative response to some things. So,
Excellent points. Wandison, I'll let you provide some comments, and I think Julie Marie, I'd love to go to open questions, and people can jump on video and ask questions. But any thoughts on that, Wandison?
Yeah, I think it's again the level of participation from local systems and structures and local actors is really important to determine and understand their capability and to extent where INGOs can really kind of like, fill the gap. So participatory program design, again, participatory program implementation and program monitoring is really key, which will help us to better understand the capacity and the readiness of the local system in terms of taking over roles and responsibilities, including resources. And that would really help us to make a determination and just find the right balance where we should really engage and participate in a program implementation.
Well, thank you for taking those questions head on, guys. I think great answers. Julie Marie, I think we'd love to hear questions, or if there's any, significant additions that some of the audience might have to the conversation we've had today. I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes for that.
Yeah, just wanted to give everybody an opportunity to come off mute. If you didn't, you did a great job, Julia, of answering some of the questions in the chat. I think we answered most of those. Either raise your hand or just come off mute if you have something to add. And I would say it doesn't have to just be questions. It could also be reflections and comments. You're all out there doing this work, and we'd love to hear your perspectives as well. It looks like I'll go with Kate and then Susan.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Kate Talenko with Corvus Health, and thanks for this great discussion. The question I have is, I think with local leadership also comes the beginning of the obligation of local fundraising. And I know that I've been, in a lot of the advising that I've done over the last year, have advised NGOs and other organizations to do local fundraising, especially with local high net worth individuals or local national companies, rather than global companies. And I was wondering what people's experience has been with that, what advice you would have on that. Thanks.
I mean, I might just add a little bit of a different perspective, Kate, which is that one thing that our team in Zambia had was somebody to come in and talk to them about sort of cost recovery methods that they might adopt as part of their own sustainability as a local NGO. So they are attempting sort of early level philanthropic pursuits and trying to do local fundraising from individuals and from corporations locally, et cetera. But they're also thinking about, is there something else that we either do or that we could participate in that would actually generate an income? So I know, for example, that Kenyan Red Cross has a hotel in Nairobi. Now, we're not thinking of something quite like that, but something, is there some other way that we could think about an investment that actually would help sustain our organization, but also, or the organization, and also that they could benefit from. So I think it's sort of get beyond sort of the usual structure of how we think about fundraising is going to be really important, because I don't think that there are always going to be the same kinds of opportunities for local fundraising. At least not right now. That is our experience in Zambia, I know.
Thank you. Okay, Susan.
Hi, I'm Susan Dockstader. I work at the Rotary Foundation in Evanston, Illinois, and I have a question for what are those ways that you have seen success in replicating projects that were developed in the local context, like Friendship Branch in Zimbabwe, and replicating that in other countries? What has been done that has been successful? I'll say I have a vested interest in this question because I'm working with a Rotary Club in Colombia that is applying for a grant for a Friendship Branch project.
Sure, I can take that. I think clarity around who is the doer at scale is very important, because when you start any project, you're going to start small. You might start with a pilot, but always asking yourself, who is the ultimate doer at scale of this project? And this is a question I always asked myself when we started Friendship Bench, and the answer was the government. And so if it is the government, that is for Zimbabwe. In globally, the doer at scale is different. In the USA, for instance, in Washington, our doer at scale is Help Age International. And it's really having that clarity around who's going to be doing that scaling, because my team is very small. And once you have that answer, you then work towards getting that doer to actually take on the project. And for Zimbabwe, it was all about getting the policymakers on board, getting our publications, showing that Friendship Bench is effective and it improves HIV outcomes, it improves NCD outcomes, really gradually integrating the sort of system. In other words, our theme was institutionalizing Friendship Bench into government. And that's what we focused on for the last 10 years. And so, understand the doer at scale.
Mm-hmm. And how did you adjust for different cultural realities? between the different contexts?
And that's a great question. What we do when we go to a new setting as Friendship Bench, we always start off with a theory of change, which is really a kind of workshop where we bring together all the key stakeholders, the community gatekeepers, and that enables us to build consensus around the hypothesized causal pathway that leads to Friendship Bench being integrated. It also enables us to ask some very difficult questions. And during that process, we are able to also identify where the low-hanging fruits are. I'll give you an example of El Salvador. When we went to El Salvador, El Salvador has a history of a lot of trauma, violence. And during the theory of change, what emerged from the discussions with the different key stakeholders was that the Catholic nuns would be the best doers at scale of Friendship Bench in El Salvador, something that we'd never done. And so we kind of focused on equipping the Catholic nuns to do Friendship Bench. They became the doers at scale. And then you have the Catholic Church, you have a society that is extremely Catholic. And so you have to just sort of understand who is going to take it to scale. And it's not always the people you think are going to take it to scale who actually take it to scale.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Great questions. Are there any more from the audience? I think we can take one more. All right. Otherwise, yeah, go ahead, Julie Marie.
I can have a question I can add. Yeah, so we've talked a lot today about sort of criteria or readiness to kind of engage in a partnership at all the different levels. And what we have had a recent experience at PQMD where we're crafting some shared metrics for product donations. And what we thought was potential barrier to accessing data, I think we learned was really not. And so I was wondering specifically, you guys had talked about the capacity to do M&E as a potential indicator for readiness for partnership. And I wondered if you guys could talk about that in your experiences with, is it really a barrier or is it a question of funding or understanding what the other people would like to measure?
I mean, I would, Mondison, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll come there.
I was just thinking that if some of it is about listening to, ensuring that, again, that their ideas about what is measurable and important to know, it's both things. It's not just like what can we measure, but like what is important for them for decision making. Data for decision making means to them would also just be an important complement to sort of thinking about how we as a community might think about success. But let me leave space for Wonderson.
Yeah, I think ML is a very important part of any program, as we all know, to monitor the program performance, success, quality, but most importantly, also to generate data and evidence that would inform decision making at different level. And as we try to build and assess the capacity of local actors and local partners, um, M&E capability and data and quality and timely data is really an important feature to monitor the program at hand, but also make really important and impactful decision at different level, including policy and practice. So that being said, we kind of see different organizations, local and international, and local systems. When I say local, local implementing partners, but also government systems and structures at different level when it comes to M&E capability and data quality. So assessing that and building the capacity and making sure we're getting really quality data timely is very critical for donors and stakeholders to make a sound and right programmatic decision, including product and supply chain.
Thank you. So we're about at time, and I'm kind of excited because I don't think this is the end of this discussion at PQMD. I think it's the beginning of us continuing to talk about this as we all evolve together. So knowing that it's not the end, I would just love everyone's last takeaway of, what should we think about as we move forward with this conversation? What would you like to leave the audience with today? Anyone can jump in.
I mean, one thing that we should all be thinking about and watching is sort of what the Department of State is currently engaged in, which is really trying to turn things more over to national governments in terms of setting the agenda, et cetera. So it will just be interesting to see what's in those memorandums of understanding that are currently being discussed, especially with partners in Africa, since many of us work there. That's going to be something we'd like to, come alongside it where it makes sense, et cetera. But to the last question about data, there was a lot being said also about the data requirements for some of that and data sharing, et cetera. And I think we all are conscious of the need for protection of data, especially individual data, et cetera, that we've all seen as an important ethical concern for us. So there's a lot of issues emerging out of the restructure and maybe the shifting gravity, if you will, that we're seeing with the U.S. government as a donor. So.
Yeah, I just want to say organizations need to be really intentional and serious about localization. It really requires serious structural reconfiguration or restructuring internally within, I think, the organizations. And also, we have to be intentional the way we operate, our modus operandi, how we design and implement a program.
Yeah, I think a question that I'm always asking my team about the work we do is it simple enough? Is it cheap enough? Is it good enough? And is it really becoming a low-hanging fruit in the community?
Great. I mean, great closing comments. Again, just to get us to the next conversation. And I think, yeah, this is a new world. So as you've all said, we have to watch closely and there's a lot of mental shifts and organizational shifts ahead of us. Julie Marie, I will turn it back over to you, but thank you for this opportunity today. I really
Yes.
enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you, Julie, for your thoughtful navigation of this really important topic. And thank you, Dixon, Mary Beth, and Wood Watson. We're stronger because of the people who are out there and come and share their perspectives on the PQMD stage. We have a quick survey before you all leave. If you don't mind just filling out this one question for us, it helps us to create better programs. And look for our upcoming events. We look forward to seeing you at a future PQMD event. And until then, take care and stay connected.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining.